Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Grit Daily Startup Show. Today we have your host, Leonard Kim, and we have our guest, Nicholas Mathews. And what we're going to be discussing is Stillwater Behavioral Health and Nicholas's journey to become one of the founders to one of these great facilities. Now, Nicholas, we've spoken before, and you've had this crazy journey where a lot of things happen. I'll let you get more into it. But to go from where you used to be to where you are today, I mean, that's kind of phenomenal. Not a lot of people are able to make that breakthrough and that change to go from doing all these crazy things to being on this other side. And when we think about like that motivation and the grit to really get there, I think this episode is going to go out there and inspire a lot of people because a lot of people might be looking at themselves, living normal lives, or having problems in their lives, and they're going to be like, wow, that's an inspiring story. This is something that could get me up in the morning and keep me going. So before we get into where you are today, do you mind recapping a little bit about that journey and that struggle you went to? Because I know how hard it was for you to kind of live through that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so originally I'm from a very small town in Oregon, um, and I grew up with a very traumatic childhood. Dad split when I was 8 or so, and prior to that, there was a lot of physical abuse and things of that nature. It just always kind of made me feel very isolated and alone when I was a kid. So very early on in my life, I started self medicating to kind of
Yeah.
deal with some of the trauma and the anxiety that I was struggling with. Um, you know, smoking pot, drinking, that kind of stuff, 11, 12 years old. And then it just kind of built, and as it does, right? I started seeking more and more powerful medication. I felt better and better when I was under the influence than I did when I was alone. I didn't have the coping skills to deal with my circumstances. And, I fell in with the wrong people, I think, right? 15, 16 years old, I start using hard narcotics, crystal meth, cocaine, heroin, things of that nature. Uh, Started uh, intravenously abusing. So I became an
Mm.
IV drug user. And by the time I was 19 years old, I was, a convicted felon, fully strung out, sleeping outside, the whole shebang. Um,
Yeah.
I got sober when I was 20. So I decided, look, the entire time that I was using, I knew that this wasn't what I was supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And I knew that I had guilt and shame for my actions, but it felt like I was so powerless. I didn't know that there was another way that I could live. It felt like it had gotten out of control so quickly. And then, like I said, fast forward, I'm 20 years old and I'm constantly trying to make a better decision in my life. And I'm consistently trying to get sober. I'm trying to make changes and everything failed
Yeah.
until finally I sort of hit a bottom where I was willing to do whatever it took, right? I got on a plane to Southern California to go into a treatment center
Hmm.
and never looked back. December 9th, 2013, I've been sober ever since.
That's crazy. And when you think about it, like in high school, junior high, the curiosity kind of arises, right? You're like, oh, someone has alcohol or weed, let me give that a try. And a lot of healed people who have great childhoods might go down and be like, okay, I'm going to give this a try and I'm going to move on. But as you stated, there's a lot of people with pain, with hurt, and then they just feel something and they're like, wow, this is something that I want to keep doing. And for some, they stick to what they first get introduced to. For others, they kind of go down this wild path, and much like you may have seen yourself going through. And sometimes you're just stuck there, and you're like, how am I ever going to find a way out once you kind of wake up and open your eyes to the reality of things? So for you to kind of get into that process where you kind of made that change, it's kind of phenomenal because a lot of people don't really have that moment where they have that aha moment where like, oh, I got to get out of it. And to me, what it sounds like is for your aha moment, it wasn't really an outside influence of someone saying, hey, you got to get out of this. It was more of an internal experience where you're like, I hit rock bottom. This is where I got to get out. And I've kind of had this similar situation where, I'm going out there working and things aren't really working out. Things just get stuck. And I'm like, it's got to be me who's the problem. I got to go out there and I got to fix something within myself, or else I'm never going to make it. And when I realized that I got to go fix me, sure, I took a year maybe working on myself, going through all my problems, just figuring things out in my own head. After that, I started writing, and that led to about 10 million reads on my content, and it turned into more of a business success. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty amazing. And for you, treatment was the first step, right? It was going out there and getting sober. But if you fast forward to today, you got like a treatment city facility over in like Montecito, right? Montecito is not a cheap place. Like Oprah lives out there, so that kind of tells how much prestige is there. And when you kind of take where you were to where you are now, that's this big gap. Can you kind of talk us a little bit more about that journey?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, I think recovery is a very interesting thing,
Mm-hmm.
in that it can teach you what you're passionate about, right? You get sober, you make a change in your life. Um, I think there's always going to be this fire that becomes ignited, right? And
Yeah,
that was really what my experience was ultimately. I started working. Uh, I think within 4 or 5 months of getting sober, I had a job where I was waiting tables. Um, but I knew that I wanted to work in treatment. When I
yeah,
was there, I remember seeing so many people that worked there that I looked up to, and aspired to be like. And they were all in recovery. And I
yeah,
thought, this is great. Like, not only are they sober and they've turned their lives around, but they're helping other people do the same thing
yeah.
and have figured out how to earn a living. And that felt so fundamentally important and so special to me. Um, so that's exactly what I did. I mean, my entire career has literally been built on the next logical step. I start working, as a technician, making $12 an hour, overnights, and I start finding areas in the company that I can be of value. I start educating myself. I start seeking my own external education, to become more valuable to the company that I worked for, and then just followed the next logical step, being promoted, chasing these different promotions, finding the career path that felt the most organic, that felt the most natural, until I got to a point where, I was able to invest in myself and do my own program.
So I think one of the things that you mentioned is that fire, that fire that kind of goes out there and fulfills you and makes you go out there for a greater purpose. And sometimes your body is blocked off from finding that fire. Like while you were consuming, there was no way you would see that fire, right? Because you were kind of distracted, right? But
Right.
then you had to kind of get out of where you are to kind of see that fire. And that fire could come from multiple places. It could be from hitting rock bottom. It could be from falling in love. It could be from realizing you did something like bought someone groceries in the grocery store and you're like, oh, I like helping people. This is what I'm passionate about. There's multiple ways that this could come in. It could be from watching other people who are inspiring, just like you stated, where you saw other leaders who went through treatment, going out there and living better lives. But
Mhm.
once you have that fire, all you have to do is feed it, fuel it. Don't let it ever burn out. And once you do, it could kind of grow into something so much more.
Yeah.
Um, Fire feels different for a lot of people, and that passion feels different. Like for me, a lot of my passion came from either hitting rock bottom and realizing I wanted to help other people never experience the same things I did, or falling in love with a woman and realizing I want to give her the entire world. And that fire, as it kind of goes out there and consumes you, it just drives you. Can you tell us a little bit more about that fire, what it felt like inside you, and how it kind of shaped you into becoming who you are?
Yeah. I mean, look, that fire that we're talking about, it's very bizarre, because it doesn't actually really feel. It feels like I no longer have resistance,
Yeah,
if that makes sense. Um, it's almost as if when you find something that you're passionate about and it becomes your primary motivator, you no longer start looking for reasons for things not to work, and you
yeah,
start looking for reasons that it will work. Something happens. It's like a psychological shift.
yeah,
I remember early on in my career thinking, oh man, these guys that I look up to that own centers and own these other things, I could never do that.
yeah.
Seems so stressful, seems blah, 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 blah. uh, all of a sudden, when you recognize, oh, that is actually what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah,
I found something that I'm supposed to do. All of a sudden, it starts to feel like the path of least resistance, and it
yeah,
starts to feel like I said before, you're looking for reasons that it will work instead of reasons that it won't, and
yeah.
then it becomes easy. It becomes not easy to accomplish, but easy to stay motivated.
Well, I like that you said earlier is before that fire comes, you see other people going out there and saying, "Oh, I can't do that. That's not for me." Because it can seem overwhelming for a lot of people, and you kind of been on the other side where you weren't even thinking about these things as well. And there's that huge dynamic shift that kind of happens. I feel a lot of people out there are struggling with this thing where they're like, I want to go out there and do these things. I'm too scared. I don't think I could do it, or it's not for me. There's nothing greater in life for me. What would you kind of tell to them? Because you were on both sides of the equation, maybe even three different sides of the equation. So there's a different way to kind of look at that. And what would you share with them?
It's a great question. Um, I think that finding, I, I, I like to think that this life is kind of broken down into many different categories, right? You got your compensation. Everybody needs to make a
Yeah,
living. My experience shows me that compensation can never be my primary motivator.
yeah,
At the end of the day, my value to money is
mhm,
inconsistent, right? Whether depending on where I'm at in my life, what content I'm absorbing, my particular feelings. There are times where I think that money is the root of all evil and I don't want anything to do with it. So
yeah,
at that point, that can't be a primary motivator for me, right? And when I talk to people and they're experiencing what you're describing, which is basically this sort of emotional destitute kind of place where they're not sure what direction to head. I don't know. I don't think there's anything out there for me. I think that their relationship with compensation is broken.
yeah.
I think a lot of people tie success to financial success. At the end of the day, success is such a uh, broad idea,
It
right? There's
is.
spiritual compensation, for
Mm-hmm.
example. Are you doing something that you feel ethically and morally passionate about? Do you feel like you're making a positive impact in the world? Um, there's security compensation, right? Security is different than just financial security. It's security and confidence of saying this is what
Yeah,
I do and I'm proud of what I do. So I always encourage people, if you're really struggling that way, you need to change your relationship with what you think success is. Because if you're just sitting there looking at, well, I just want to be rich or I want to make more money, you're going to be focusing on point A and point B, and you're going to
mm-hmm.
forget to run the race. At the end of the day, you need to be focusing on the absolute next logical step as opposed to, oh, in 10 years, this is my 10-year plan. I'm going to have $1 million in the bank and I'm going to have this and I'm going to have that. Okay, that's great. And you should have your vision board and you should have all your ideas. But if you set that up and you only ever focus on the finish line, you're never ever going to run the race.
I can
Take things
understand that.
down, you know?
Yeah, I can understand that. Most recently, I had an opportunity where I could make close to $500,000 a year, but I would have to fly out to Atlanta, uproot my life, and everything like that. And all my friends are going, "Go take it, go take it, go take it." And if financial motivators were my only motivator, and of course I hop on the plane, get right over there. But it's so much more complex of an equation. You have your mom who's an elderly range, or I have my mom who's like an elderly age range, and it's like, what could potentially happen if I'm there for a few years? Sure, I might come home with $1 million, but is that $1 million worth it? I don't know, because her health could become in jeopardy. My cat's here. She's scared to go out the front door of the home. Put her onto a plane. That's going to traumatize her for the rest of her life. And then there's the other things that you have to consider, like the weather, friends, and all these other things, because it's not just the monetary success that really matters. And I think one thing that really I look into a lot is a lot of people are like, your network is your net worth. Go out there and go get rid of the naysayers and things like that. But some of the most toxic people I have in my life have been like the most supportive people through my life who've been there through the thick and thin, which is kind of crazy, because if I were to have got rid of them and I only kept like the good solid people, the ethical, the compassionate, empathetic people in my life, when things hit the fan, I'd be sitting here with no friends at all, which is kind
Hmm.
of interesting because there's so much philosophy out there of, oh, you got to go out there and do the rise and grind, but there's so much more complex layers to everything. What's your kind of thoughts on the overall picture of that success? Because we know it's not all about the money, it's about getting a value out of what you're doing, feeling good about it, having respect, being in an industry you care about. And while the money is a byproduct of it all and everyone wants it, like, I don't feel it should be the number one motivator, and it seems like you don't either.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, look, I think there's a happy medium. I think that you would be hard pressed to find somebody that works as hard as I do. um, I'm very enmeshed with that culture, and I do believe it to be true. Right? You have to go out and grind. There's a competitive world out there, and I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't chase with extreme passion what I wanted. The difference is that what I wanted wasn't a paycheck.
Yeah.
What I wanted was
Yeah.
an idea that was so much bigger than me. I wanted a culture. I wanted a community. I wanted to share experience. I wanted a legacy. I wanted to make an impact in other people's lives. The paycheck will come, of
Yeah.
course, and it has. I'm not trying to sit here and pretend that it hasn't, but my point is that my motivator was so much more than just a paycheck. I wanted something so much bigger, and it was bigger than just me and my own sort of little goals. Those are
Yeah.
all very selfish, excuse me. And my experience shows that when I try to do things where I am removed from the equation, they tend
Mhm.
to be so much more successful. So yeah, there are days where I work 14, 15 hours a day. And I'm remarkably good at what I do. I'm not saying you should do that. It's kind of unhealthy. I don't take enough trips. I don't vacation enough. I don't practice enough self-care. But what I can say is that every single one of those hours, I'm doing something that I'm passionate about, something that I care about, and something that I believe to be important. That's
I
that's the key.
I can agree with that because I'm a marketer. I love marketing like no tomorrow. Send me down with a project. I'll come up with like 62-page document in like 3 days that just kind of outlines everything that has to go out there and be done. Now I might take a step back after I create it and get a few rest days to go out there and rebuild myself, which maybe that's a little bit more balanced than your side where you kind of just keep going and grinding. But when you're passionate about something, you just grind, you get it out there. I've
Yeah.
also been talking to this other startup founder. What she's trying to do is just outsource her entire thing. She's like, I need help with this, I need help with that. I'm like, I'm a marketer, I don't know how to do this stuff that you want me to do. You want me to put together pro forma for you? Like, what are you doing? Like, you got to take that responsibility, and there's some things that you really got to go out there and do yourself. And earlier, what you kind of talked about is that larger vision, that legacy, going out there and helping people. You treated how many people in your centers? How many do you have? Like, this thing's kind of grown to kind of larger than what you could have ever pictured when you first started, right?
Yeah, I mean, in some respect, absolutely. It's actually it grew to a point where I had to physically stop the growth.
Yeah,
I had to go in and say no more. I'm happy with where we're at because I felt like if it continues to expand, my product is going to become saturated,
yeah,
and I won't be able to give that same personal attention that I really believe in, as the difference between my programs and some other programs. So I not only did I hit a ceiling of what we were capable of, so we had to expand, but then I kind of hit a ceiling of expansion where I felt like, you know what, anything more is going to be greedy and negligent. So
yeah,
yeah, I mean, look, you explained it very well, right? There's a lot of things that never even felt like work to me. Sitting
yeah,
there at 2 o'clock in the morning on a laptop, putting together my own pro forma or balancing QuickBooks because I couldn't afford a CFO at the time. And I
yeah,
didn't, but I knew I needed to track and do my own accounting. I didn't know anything about accounting. So I go online and I register for classes, for financial accounting
yeah,
classes that I can take online. I did all of that for myself. I
yeah,
didn't, I didn't seek any education because somebody told me I needed it for a job. I
yeah.
did it because I wanted to know the ins and outs of my business because I believed in my business. So, in hindsight, yeah, it was remarkably difficult, but it never felt difficult. It felt
Yeah.
natural. It felt like exactly what I was supposed to be doing.
I think that natural feeling is what it's all about. And a lot of people out there, they might go in this school and everything, but I went to community college. I took an accounting class. I learned a lot. I took a law class. I'm like, wait, you can really do that? Like, these things that you kind of learn along the way when you have a set curriculum kind of build up those skills that you kind of need to be more flexible and more congruent with what you're doing as well. So while people do talk badly about it, like, learning the basics of that stuff is kind of pretty fundamental with what you kind of got to go out there and do as well. Another thing I kind of realized is you kind of talked more about like going out there and hitting that point where if you go and build this further, it would saturate the product. And I have friends out there who have like marketing firms with like 15, 50 employees or whatever it may be. Once you kind of hit like a certain employee number, it goes from rise and grind and kind of switches over to, hey, I need to go and help my X or whatever do Y. And then the concerns in the office kind of change and the culture kind of changes and everything like that. And then you kind of don't have that ability to go out there and make that same impact you do, because the whole dynamics of everything changes with the culture. It's why when you kind of look at a lot of large organizations, let's say car manufacturer, university, whatever it may be, they got 5, 10,000, maybe even more people. It's kind of interesting because all these different departments are siloed. Marketing has no idea what accounting is doing, or PR, or sales, or like engineering, or patient care, whatever it may be. Like they have no integration within each other. And it's kind of interesting when you kind of look at it, because it's kind of built where it's too big to fail. But
Mhm.
if it didn't have that much revenue coming in, how would it ever survive?
Mhm.
And I think that's something to really think about. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs might get too greedy on that journey where they're like, I gotta go hit that $1 billion mark. And it could and ultimately end up saturating their product as well.
Mhm.
And one of the things I wanted to ask you is, when you hit that cap where you're like, I don't want to grow this anymore. I don't think that's a lot. I don't think that's something that's very common for a lot of entrepreneurs to do.
Mhm.
So can you kind of talk more about that?
Well, sure. I mean, look, truth be told, it didn't feel natural. So
Yeah.
ultimately, what I did is I started other companies. That's
Yeah.
the truth. I have that drive. I have that sort of entrepreneurial spirit. So when my treatment centers more or less kind of plateaued, where I was like, this is as good as it can get without ever sacrificing quality of care.
Yeah.
This industry is very particular in that I'm not making a vacuum cleaner,
Yeah.
right? I'm trying to sell you a way of life. That's a very, very complicated thing to sell, which means that I need a team of the absolute best, most capable people who share my same vision, right? If you work at Ford, everybody there is going to say, oh, Ford is the best. But then they can also go out and show you and say, look, here's the car. You like it. We don't have the same thing. We're all trying to sell an idea that life
Yeah.
in recovery is better than life in active addiction. Um, and really, if you're a prospective customer of mine, you just kind of have to take my word for it. You
Yeah.
got to trust me. That's difficult. And the larger your team becomes, the more likely it is that people are going to slip between the cracks.
Yeah.
Because I'm only one person. I can't guarantee that every single member of my team at a certain scale is going to believe exactly what I believe. Right now, I can. Everybody that
Mhm.
works for me, I meet with them individually. They know my name, they have my cell phone number. We are all a part of this team.
Yeah.
And that team, that culture, that community, that is the backbone of my product. Um, so when I realized that, and it became clear, I would see other centers that grew too quickly. They would open up multiple centers, and then before you know it, they had a bad program. They had one
Mhm.
where it wasn't up to standard. It
Yeah.
wasn't what they wanted it to be. And in my business, the consequences of that can be catastrophic because these are
Yeah.
people's lives. Right? If you're coming
It
into my
is.
facility, your life depends on it. And if you're not getting good care, then that's not okay. Right?
Yeah. It's
So
not.
basically, what I did is when I became clear that I kind of hit that limit with this particular company, I started to get creative and start new companies. I
Yeah.
started a pharmaceutical distribution company, and I started a company called Align Wellness that does personalized repetitive TMS therapy. So it still helps people, but it
Yeah.
treats them on an outpatient level. And I use TMS therapy to treat anxiety and depression and Alzheimer's and autism in kids, and an entirely different scope of practice, but still has the same capacity to help people.
Yeah.
I started ancillary companies that complement my existing entity, right? So, now I think I've got probably 6 companies that all operate sort of harmoniously,
Yeah.
you know, and that was all because I still wanted to grow. I still wanted
Yeah.
to tap into that entrepreneurial spirit and drive of mine. But I also had to know when enough was enough for one
Yeah.
particular company. You got to pay attention to that.
I think that's really smart. And that entrepreneurial bug was able to go out there and then expand into other things to go out there and help additional people and bring in 6 potential other sources of revenue as well. One thing that I've seen when a company gets too big is when I was like working over at American Honda, like, the sun visor in the car? Like they started skimping on that and making it thinner to go out there and compromise and cut down margins. They were doing it on the center armrest as well. And for me, seeing things like that, like cutting corners, making compromises to fit the car into a certain budget, it's very disheartening to see a brand do that, especially if you're running something like a treatment center to do that. That could have catastrophic type of effects. And I think you made the right decision in going out there and expanding into other different lines. Well, with that said, you have six companies right now. What do you kind of see, envision in the future for everything that you have going on?
Who knows? That's the beautiful thing about my life today is that I genuinely feel like taking this path, while it was very difficult and strenuous and filled with pressures and pitfalls and mistakes and lessons and all the negative things that you can imagine would be tied to this. Um, what it has afforded me is true professional freedom, right? In the sense that my future isn't written. It's not a guarantee. Any of these companies could fail tomorrow. Any of them could go on and be remarkably successful tomorrow. What I do tomorrow is not dictated by what I do today. I have the
Exactly.
freedom to sort of write my own story as I see fit. Um, and that's the best gift. That's the best form of compensation I could have ever asked for. There's no amount of money that can equate to that,
Yeah,
right? That I get to just do whatever I want. If I find something that I'm passionate about, I get to go and chase that. And
exactly.
nobody can tell me otherwise. I've built a tremendous amount of character and a tremendous amount of confidence through these experiences that have afforded me a mentality where I genuinely believe I can kind of do anything I want to do. I've got enough evidence in my life to prove that to me. Um, and I think that if that idea sounds valuable to you as an individual, then go out and chase it. There's nothing stopping you. That's the beautiful thing about this country. Nobody can tell you otherwise. Go do it.
Yeah. I think that's inspiring because you're pretty much as much proof as it gets that anyone could go out there and do anything and accomplish it. And I think anyone listening who may be on the fence about whatever they're doing, who may be hesitant, once they hear your story, they might be able to go out there and drive themselves to do something better. And if anyone out there even has addiction problems, they'll probably reach out to your clinics as well and see what kind of programs you have because they might see this as that pivotal moment where they're like, I can't keep living like this. Anyways, do you have any final thoughts for us before we wrap up, Nicholas?
No, I mean, as you said, I think I always just want to encourage people. If you're struggling, reach out. You can always get help. If it's not me, there's going to be somebody who's willing to answer the phone and help. Do your due diligence, find the right people, and make changes in your life. Nobody's going to do it for you.
Yeah, no one is going to do it for you. And I think some people wait for someone to come by and knock, but no one ever does. It's all about lifting us up from the bootstraps and getting back out there. Well, Nicholas Mathews, I wanted to thank you so much for being a part of this Grit Daily startup show. And I hope you inspired a lot of people today. And I think a lot of listeners to the show will probably say that you have. For everyone tuning in, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Grit Daily Startup Show with your host, Leonard Kim. And we'll see you next time.